The night before my wedding, my future mother-in-law slid a prenup across the rehearsal dinner table in front of both families and said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear, "Sign it, gold digger." She had no idea I'd brought my own folder to that dinner too. If you've ever been underestimated by people who never bothered to ask what you actually do for a living, hit subscribe right now because this one's oddly satisfying. Comment below and tell me the boldest thing anyone's ever accused you of without checking their facts first. Now let me back up to how we got to that table. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32, and for the past 6 years, I've worked as a biomedical patent attorney, the unglamorous kind of legal work that happens almost entirely behind closed doors, drafting and defending intellectual property for small biotech startups trying not to get swallowed by bigger ones. I met Daniel Winslow at a conference 18 months before that rehearsal dinner, and I fell for him slowly, the ordinary way. Dinners and long calls, and the specific comfort of someone who laughed at the same things I did. What I didn't fully understand until much later was that the Winslow name carried a certain weight in his hometown, Old Money, a family furniture manufacturing business that had supposedly been thriving for 3 generations. I never asked for details. It genuinely never occurred to me that it mattered. Backstory, pattern. Daniel's mother, Patricia Winslow, decided who I was within about 4 minutes of meeting me. "A lawyer," she said the first time we were introduced, looking me over the way you'd assess a piece of furniture for scratches. How practical. Over the following year, every family gathering came with some version of the same undertone. She asked, more than once, whether I'd considered a prenuptial conversation, phrased as though it were a delicate favor she was doing me by bringing it up early. She mentioned, unprompted, the value of the family's furniture business at every opportunity, the size of the estate, the trust fund Daniel would eventually inherit, the way you'd mention a burglar alarm to a stranger loitering near your house. I found it almost funny, honestly, more than insulting, mostly because I never corrected the assumption she'd clearly already made about my finances. I didn't advertise what I did outside general terms, patent law, which to most people sounds vaguely respectable and entirely unthreatening. What Patricia didn't know, because I'd never had a reason to mention it at a dinner party, was that 4 years earlier, I'd represented a small biotech startup in a licensing dispute, taken a portion of my fee in equity instead of cash because the founders were cash-strapped and I believed in the technology. And that startup's core patent, the one I personally defended through 2 appeals, had been acquired by a major pharmaceutical company 8 months before I met Daniel. My equity stake alone was worth, conservatively, several times what I understood the Winslow furniture business to be valued at. I hadn't told Daniel the exact number either. It wasn't something I led with. It never felt relevant to who we actually were together. Triggering incident. The rehearsal dinner was at a private room at a restaurant Patricia had chosen, 22 guests, both families, the kind of evening meant to be warm and low stakes before the real thing the next day. Patricia stood partway through dessert, tapping her glass for attention the way she always did before saying something she'd clearly rehearsed. "Before we go any further," she said, smiling in that particular way that never reached her eyes, "I think it's important for everyone here to understand that our family takes protecting what we've built very seriously." She reached into her handbag and produced a folder, sliding it across the table toward me in front of both families. "This is a standard prenuptial agreement. Our attorney drew it up. I'm sure someone in your position understands the wisdom of signing it before tomorrow." Then, quieter, but not quiet enough, meant only for the people close enough to hear it clearly, "Sign it, gold digger." The table went silent in that specific, awful way tables go silent when someone said something true enough to be embarrassing or cruel enough to need addressing. My own mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Daniel's face went red and he started to speak, but I put my hand gently on his arm because I'd actually been expecting some version of this evening for months, and I'd come prepared. "I appreciate you being direct, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level, the same voice I use in depositions when someone's trying to rattle me. "I actually brought something for tonight too." I reached into my own bag and set my folder beside hers on the table, unopened for the moment. "Before we get into paperwork, I want to make sure everyone understands what we're actually discussing, because I don't think we're starting from the same information." I opened my folder and slid out a single summary page, not the full documentation, just enough. 4 years ago, I represented a biotech startup called Meridian Genomics in a patent licensing dispute. I took part of my fee in equity because the founders couldn't pay cash, and I believed in the science. That company's core patent was acquired by a major pharmaceutical firm 8 months ago. I named the acquisition figure, quietly, clearly, watching Patricia's expression shift in real time. My equity stake from that deal is currently valued at roughly 4 times the appraised value of Winslow Furniture, based on the public filings I looked up before tonight, since I assumed at some point I'd need to. The room had gone from uncomfortable to something closer to stunned. Daniel's father set down his glass slowly. Patricia opened her mouth and closed it again, the folder she'd slid across the table sitting there, suddenly looking a great deal smaller than it had 30 seconds earlier. I'm not opposed to a prenup, actually. I think they're reasonable. And frankly, as an attorney, I'd have insisted on drafting one properly myself eventually. But I brought my own draft tonight too, prepared by my own counsel, because if we're protecting what we've built, I have quite a bit to protect as well, and I'd want any agreement to reflect that honestly for both of us. I slid my folder the rest of the way across the table. I'd be happy to have our attorneys review both drafts together this week, so we're working from the same facts instead of assumptions. Patricia didn't touch either folder. She sat very still, the practiced smile gone entirely, replaced with something that looked, for the first time since I'd known her, like genuine recalculation. "I didn't realize," she started, then stopped, clearly unsure how to finish a sentence that had never needed finishing before in her life. Daniel, beside me, finally spoke, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it directed at his mother. "You called her a gold digger in front of both our families without knowing a single real thing about her finances, Mom. You didn't ask, you just decided because it was convenient." Patricia didn't have an answer for that either. The resolution, the wedding happened the next day, exactly as planned, though Patricia was noticeably quieter throughout, and the toast she gave was shorter and considerably more careful than the one she'd clearly prepared before that dinner. The actual prenup process, once both families' attorneys got involved, turned out fairly standard. Mutual protections, nothing dramatic, the kind of agreement 2 reasonable adults draw up when they both have something worth protecting. Patricia and I are not close, even now, a year later, but she stopped introducing me at family gatherings as Daniel's lawyer friend, isn't that practical, and started, at minimum, using my actual name. I think about that dinner sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of dry amusement. I could have corrected the assumption months earlier and avoided the entire scene. I chose not to, mostly because I wanted to see how far someone would go on an assumption they'd never bothered to check first. I learned something from it anyway. The loudest accusations usually come from people who've done the least homework. Has someone ever accused you of something they never actually bothered to verify first? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story felt satisfying, share it with someone who needs their own folder ready one day. This is Claire, and this has been Revenge of Betrayal. Remember, the truth doesn't need you to raise your voice. It just needs you to have the receipts.